Hello, my name is Tsuruga, Social Protection Program Manager at the International Labour Organization Country Office, Jakarta. I am going to talk about our recommendations, analysis and the recommendations on the policy reforms of the unemployment insurance scheme in Indonesia. The government of Indonesia is required to conduct an assessment every 2 years, according to the government regulation number 37 of 2021. And we have conducted analysis, policy analysis, and provided recommendation last year in 2023. So today we are also invited to the Ministry of Labor's meeting to possibly finalize their draft plan, and we would like to reconfirm what we have recommended and what we think and what I think would be good for Indonesia. And I'd like to share my screen and briefly present the major reform points that we think important. First of all, coverage. I think it is important to extend legal coverage and effective coverage in Indonesia. After 2 years of implementation of the Jaminan Kehilangan Pekerja, JKP, or unemployment insurance scheme, the scheme successfully enrolled about 12 million active participants in the Jaminan Kehilangan Pekerja scheme. But that is a still small proportion of waged employees, salaried workers. That is 50 million in Indonesia. So if we take the proportion, that the ratio is still, the share is still 25% of waged workers. That is lower than the International Labour Standards, ILO Convention 102, the International Social Security Minimum Standard, that requires 50% of all employees to be enrolled in such a scheme. If we remind ourselves of the legal coverage of the JKP, there are about 5 important criteria listed. First of all, Indonesia citizenship, and he or she must be below the age 54 at the time of registration. So it means older persons above that threshold is excluded, and he or she must be an employee, cannot be self-employed, and must be the member of Jaminan Hari Tua, that is a Provident Fund scheme. And that is also, by the way, mandatory for large, medium, and small enterprises, and voluntary application for micro enterprises. Once employees are enrolled in employment injury insurance schemes specific to construction workers, he or she is not eligible to participate in JKP. That is also the rule applied. And then lastly, the participants must have JKN health insurance, national health insurance scheme, and they must contribute to the scheme. So persons who are exempted from paying contributions to the national health insurance schemes excluded by law and regulations from the unemployment insurance schemes. So these are the major 5 criteria for the JKP participants. Let's recap. The legal coverage of BPJS employment schemes looks like this among employee. I didn't add self-employed column, but it basically shows the legal coverage of employees in the company or people who have employer-employee relationship. Again, employment injury insurance is mandatory for all companies to enroll them, no matter what size of enterprise they manage. They must enroll all employees. Old age savings scheme, defined contribution scheme, JHT, is mandatory only for companies above the level of small enterprises, and micro enterprises voluntarily eligible to registering their employees, and JKP at the bottom. If I plotted the number of active participants by different schemes by different categories of workers. So JKK has 23 million participants, active members in its regular scheme, and it also has 7 million construction workers in a separate specific schemes. So these workers are registered at the level of project, so BPJS doesn't have individual data of their participants. And the difference between JHT and JKK is about 5.7 million workers, and the difference between JKP and JHT is about 4.6 millions. So it's a kind of simple math. So exclusion of JKK construction specific schemes effectively excludes 7 million workers from JKP coverage. In the other words, if the JKP extends legal coverage to these workers, it can easily extend the coverage to additional 7 million workers. Similarly, the requirement for JHT membership effectively excludes 5.7 million workers, even though BPJS has a membership data of these workers. And then also JKN membership and age restrictions effectively exclude additional 4.6 million workers. So applying a JKP coverage to all JHT participants simply will extend 5.7 million additional workers coverage, and removing JKN requirements and age restrictions will additionally extend the coverage to 4.6 million more workers. Our proposal is to simply apply mandate all employers to register their employees, just like a JKK. So if we follow the same coverage requirement to JKK, then the JKP coverage will be about 30 million employees. That is 60%, 59% of all employees that will go above the Social Security minimum standards. That is our proposal. One of the major issues that the government of Indonesia considers is the low level of claim. We analyzed why the government or the JKP has such a low number of claims from policy perspectives. There is no official information provided by the government's institutions, but according to media and many other sources, we understand that about 20 to 30,000 claims per month that BPJS employment is dealing with. So in total, probably 350,000 claims per year, which is considerably lower than our initial estimates. So there are a lot of policy restrictions that make it happen. Firstly, the required contribution. It requires a 6 consecutive month of payments. Our proposal is to simply remove that 6 consecutive month requirement, because many workers may not be able to fulfill this condition. Another important point is that JKP currently limits the number of claims up to 3 months, 3 times during a career, and it will penalize for the subsequent claims. Second claims requires a 5-year waiting period, and the third claims will also require another 5 years waiting period. And we don't think this is a necessary arrangement to put in place. According to, I will explain the reason why we think in that way. According to the government regulation on fixed-term employment, PKWT, fixed-term contractors, it is clear that employers can issue a contract much shorter than even 1 month. It removes all the restrictions from the original, the labor law. So employers can issue shorter contract than 1 month up to 5 years in practice. Employers must pay then compensation for working 1 consecutive month or longer. So if employer issue longer than 1 month contract, they would have to pay some allowance or compensation according to the regulation. But they don't have to issue the contract longer than 1 month. So in practice, I suspect employers may keep extending a short contract to avoid paying this compensation to workers in practice. And eventually many PKWT employees may not meet a minimum contribution requirements for 6 consecutive months because their contracts are issued short with a short term and continue to be extended again and again. So they will never be able to fulfill the minimum 6 consecutive month requirements, in my view. We don't have such a data from BPS or Ministry of Manpower, so we cannot confirm how many people are currently affected by such an arrangement. In terms of subsequent claims, this is not conformity with the International Labour Standards, Convention 102 and 168. It says that the qualifying conditions shouldn't be too shouldn't be longer than what is considered necessary to prevent abuse. And from such a perspective, we don't think this arrangement is necessary, and therefore it is not conformity with the International Labour Standards. Reasons for unemployment. This is another factor you could possibly improve. Currently, the regulations stipulates in a quite simple way. It sets involuntary termination of definite or indefinite or definite term employment can be granted with unemployment benefits. But the definition of involuntary termination is not very clear in the regulation. So we think it is important to regulate the definition, especially voluntary resignation with a just cause. And again, it should allow expiry of fixed-term contract if it has an involuntary nature of termination. And importantly, forced resignation should be considered as involuntary category of termination. Let me explain one by one. For example, the expiry of fixed-term employment contract can be regulated in such a way as follows. For example, although employees wanted to continue working for the same employer, but the employer didn't offer an extension of fixed-term contract, that has some nature, involuntary nature of termination, because workers wanted to continue, but employers decided not to issue the contract again. Another example may be the case where, again, employees wanted to continue working for the same employer, and then in fact, employers used to promise to extend the contract, but employers changed her mind, and then didn't extend contract. That has a clear indication that workers wanted to work, but employers didn't. It decided not to extend contracts. It has involuntary nature of termination. So in such case, such case can be acceptable for the good reason for unemployment benefit payment. Another important aspect is voluntary resignation with just cause. There is no detailed international labor standards that provides a detailed definition of it, but I can show the long list of Japanese case, how the Japan defined such a case. It says lack of physical capacity because of aging, etc., or they have birth disability, etc. They in workplace, pregnancy and childbirth and childcare. Workers may decide to leave the job because of these reasons. And also sudden change in the family circumstances. Mother, father died, and then I have to go home and support them. I mean, they're survivors, widowers, or take care of them because their parents requires care, long-term care. My spouse or relatives lives remotely, far away from me, and then I need to live closer to them. And then I got married, or I need to provide nursery services, but those services are not available in the location where we live. And my husband moved to the other county, and then I need to accompany him, so I cannot continue working. So for such a commuting impossible or difficulty can be regarded as a just cause for resignation. And working conditions that initially employers offered have been significantly changed. That can be also regarded as a good reason for self-resignation, voluntary resignation. These are some of the examples that Japan applies to define these cases. What about forced resignations? Harassment case, or the salary decreased significantly. It sets the threshold 85% decrease. Or employers delayed the payment of wage. Or too much overtime, or other working conditions are not really good to continue working. Employer doesn't comply with the law. Supervisors harass you. So these are some of the reasons that can be categorized as forced resignation, because these resignations are not related to any fault of workers. These reasons for resignations attributable to employers. So it may be considered as involuntary reason or factors for unemployment. To improve benefits, according to the international labor standards, it requires 45% of previous wage up to 13 weeks. So Indonesian, the JKP maybe looked okay because it provides 45% for the last 3 months. However, I wanted to point out one thing. That is the cap. Currently, the maximum insurable earnings is set at 5 million rupiah. That is way too low, in my view. That is lower than the average wage of employees in Jakarta. So it means most of Jakartan employees cannot achieve 45% of their previous wage. So that is way lower than the international social security minimum standard. We suggest the JKP will follow the same ceiling that is set by the Jaminan pension. According to the Minister of Finance, with this threshold, the top 5% of workers are excluded from, I mean, only top 5% of workers are affected by this threshold. So that is relatively fine. But 5 million is lower, too low in my view. And once this ceiling has been set, it should be automatically indexed with certain indicators, in my view. In a country where the parliament and the government can continuously revise the ceiling every year, we don't have to recommend such a modality. But in fact, the ceiling hasn't been changed for the last 3 years. So the value should be changed to maintain the scheme design. So we recommend to keep set this ceiling at the level of JP ceilings, that is 10 million, and adjust it automatically with the same index as a JP, GDP growth rate. And ideally, in the future, the JP indexation mechanism should follow wage growth instead of GDP growth, and JKP indexation mechanism should also follow wage growth in our view. And then lastly, the reference wage to calculate benefit should be average in our view. Currently, it's referred to the last wage, but what if employers pay very large amount of salary in the very last month of their employment? The JKP will have to unfairly pay a lot of amount of benefit to such workers, and that can also cause the situation where workers and employers negotiate and increase the last month wage for the sake of employees to get more benefits from JKP. So many countries apply the averaging wage, and we recommend 6-month average wage to be used. Finance, the international social security standards only requires it shouldn't, employees' contribution shouldn't be more than half of the total contribution. So in Indonesia, it's conformity with the international labor standards. However, it is very rare for workers not to pay the scheme because workers are the ones who will receive the benefits. So it is very, very rare in the region, and possibly only the countries in the region. So it can be considered to change and explore the contribution of workers in the future, in my view. The administration, the the administrative arrangements has been dealt by Pasapasa Culture, Pascal ID of the Ministry of Manpower, and BPJS employment. In the second month of unemployment benefit payment, BPJS in practice check, validate at least five times application, CV submissions to 5 different companies, or to attend 1 job interviews. That is a requirement for them. However, if I understand correctly, such an arrangement is validated on a self-reporting basis. How can the BPJS or Pascal ID validate if the reporting is correct or including a lie or false statement? That is a question. And our proposal is that either Pascal or BPJS requires participants, recipients, to report physically or online every month. So they set mandatory meetings every month and then have interviews. And BPJS officials or Pascal officials must validate must validate they still have these participants still be unemployed, willing to work and capable to work and available to take a job every month. That is the world standards as well. What about the consequence of refusing job offers by the authorities? Pascal may offer the job opportunities, the BPJS may offer the job opportunities. And normally in the other countries, they cannot refuse without any good reasons to accept that such an offer. Similarly, in case of vocational training, BPJS requires 80% attendance ratio, but it doesn't say the BPJS can suspend the benefit payment. It needs to be clarified at the regulation level. Here is the very last slide about the entitlement to other social security benefits. Currently, it is not very clear or not provided, in my view. If workers are receiving unemployment benefits, these workers are not automatically granted medical care, access to free medical care, access to accumulating pension entitlements, unless they registered as a self-employed. But if they registered as a self-employed, they may lose JKP benefits because they have a job. What about the case of illness? Can they take a sick leave period during a job search? Or what if unemployment benefit beneficiaries become pregnant? Can they continue receiving benefits? These are the quite common requirements by the international labor standards for unemployed workers, and it is not clearly stipulated in the regulation of JKP, and I trust that these benefits are not provided to JKP participants as of today. Yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I hope this is useful for the reform of JKP policies.